1942. A hush-hidden workshop somewhere in the English countryside. Around a long bench, British engineers inspected what at first glance looked like ordinary lumps of coal. But these were not fuel, they were weapons, lumps molded and camouflaged to resemble coal so convincingly that a German stokeman would happily shovel them into a locomotive firebox without a second thought. The instant that counterfeit coal hit the furnace, a heat-sensitive fuse would trigger, the explosive would detonate, the pressurized boiler would rupture, and a train could be torn apart from the inside out. No claim of responsibility, no telltale fragments, just another accidental boiler explosion that local investigators would chalk up to mechanical failure. This was SOE's explosive coal, a sabotage device that turned the enemy's own fuel supply into a weapon against them. To understand the logic behind something so seemingly bizarre, you must understand how completely Nazi Germany ran on rails. By 1941, the Reich controlled a swathe of Europe from the Atlantic to the approaches of Moscow. The German war machine moved men, armored vehicles, ammunition, food, and above all, fuel, almost entirely by train. Road transport consumed scarce petrol, railways consumed coal. Trains were the arteries of occupation and logistics. Destroy enough locomotives and you choke the circulation of an army. But locomotives are sturdy, repairable, and often heavily guarded. Damaging track is disruptive, but usually repairable within days. Bridges were defended. Conventional sabotage required skilled operatives to approach infrastructure, place charges, and escape before enemy patrols arrived, a task that cost many resistance fighters their lives. The British needed an alternative, a method that required minimal technical skill from local partisans, could be planted discreetly by anyone with access to a coal pile, and would disable locomotives by exploiting their own boilers. The answer was developed and manufactured in a cluster of SOE research and production units dotted around Hertfordshire. Station 12, Aston House near Stevenage, became the principal hub for this work after explosives testing disturbed the code breakers at Bletchley Park, and the sabotage labs were moved in November 1940. Under Colonel Leslie Cardew Wood, Station 12 evolved into a sophisticated clandestine factory, a place that produced time pencils, limpet mines, and a long list of deceptive ordnance. Station 15, the thatched barn at Borehamwood, hosted SOE's camouflage and prop-making section under Lieutenant Colonel Elder Wills, a pre-war film production art director who recruited prop makers, modelers, and craftsmen. Together, these facilities turned imagination into munitions. Making explosive coal posed three stubborn challenges. The devices had to look indistinguishable from the local coal so they would pass casual inspection. They had to survive being handled, tossed into bunkers, and shoved into tenders without failing, and they had to detonate reliably once subjected to the intense heat of a locomotive firebox rather than accidental handling. British engineers solved this by combining small, high-energy charges with carefully engineered fusing and superb camouflage.
Each device typically contained about a quarter pound of plastic explosive. In British use, a formulation labeled Nobel 808, a green, putty-like explosive with a faint almond smell developed by Nobel Chemicals for sabotage work. Surrounding the charge was a number 27 detonator coupled to a heat-sensitive ignition system. When the fake coal was pushed into a blazing firebox, the heat would trigger the fuse, fire the detonator, and detonate the main charge. Even a quarter pound of PE exploded inside a confined boiler could breach a steam vessel, and the secondary effect was what devastated a locomotive. A ruptured boiler operating at hundreds of pounds per square inch would explode outward, shredding boilers, frames, and running gear, and turning a serviceable locomotive into scrap. Early production approaches were experimental and fragile. At first, technicians literally drilled real lumps of coal with a 6-inch serrated core bit, stuffed the cavity with explosive, and concealed the bore with coal dust and adhesive. Arthur Christie, who worked at Station 12 on early trials, later described inserting about a quarter-pound of plastic explosive into drilled coal. That method worked, but was vulnerable. Real coal could fracture or crumble during drilling, and seams sometimes betrayed the deception. Station 15's prop makers solved the problem by creating molded coal shells, dyed plaster or resin forms textured and dusted with real coal fines so they matched anthracite, bituminous, or lignite variants. Later refinements used metal cores to hold the charge, poured plaster around them, and sealed without visible joints. The result, clamshell devices and solid moldings indistinguishable to a casual glance and rugged enough to survive handling. SOE produced both explosive and incendiary variants and made sizes to match local fuels. Lignite, anthracite, domestic stoves, power station coal, every variety was mimicked by color and surface finish, so the fake lumps would blend into a coal pile. Production ramped up. Between 1941 and 1945, SOE manufactured roughly 3.5 tons of explosive coal. At an estimated cost of about £25 per item, that tonnage suggests several thousand individual devices. Contemporary estimates place the total between roughly 6,000 and 14,000 lumps, depending on size mixes and accounting methods. Distribution relied on the special duty squadrons of the RAF based at Tempsford. No. 138 Squadron and No. 161 Squadron, operating Halifaxes, Stirlings, and Lysanders, flew clandestine supply missions and agent drops into occupied Europe. Over the war, these squadrons flew more than 13,500 sorties and delivered in excess of 10,000 tons of supplies to resistance networks. Explosive coal formed a small but specialized component of those loads. France received the lion's share. Shipments also reached Belgium, Norway, Poland, and the Yugoslav partisans, who prized anything that could be used without specialist skills amid their constant guerrilla attacks on Axis rail lines.
Here we encounter a methodological problem with reconstructing the explosive coal story. Despite the relatively large production and distribution, specific, well-documented attacks attributed solely to coal bombs are hard to find. The weapon was designed intentionally to leave no smoking gun, one of its virtues. A successful boiler explosion would be indistinguishable to German investigators from catastrophic equipment failure or maintenance neglect. If explosive coal did its job, the very success of the device made it historically invisible. Further complicating researchers' task, many SOE operational records were destroyed after the war or remain restricted, and railway sabotage across occupied Europe was applied with multiple techniques, making individual attribution difficult. That said, the broader record of railway disruption is clear and devastating. The French resistance alone mounted thousands of attacks. Between June 1943 and May 1944, they carried out over 1,800 deliberate actions against locomotives, rolling stock, and track using explosives, arson, mechanical interference, and ambush. In the weeks around D-Day, coordinated sabotage cut rail movements dramatically. Contemporary sources report hundreds of specific cuts and nearly 500 attacks obstructing German reinforcement flows in the early days of the invasion. Yugoslav partisans also kept German rail security at a high state of alarm. German commanders there complained bitterly about the resources devoured by guarding railheads and coal supplies. Locomotives were a particularly valuable target because tracks could be repaired in days, but replacing a destroyed locomotive often required months in a factory, so attacks that destroyed motive power had outsized strategic impact. Explosive coal's value therefore lies less in a catalog of named incidents and more in the fear and uncertainty it injected. Once rumors spread that any coal pile might contain a bomb, German occupiers faced two nasty choices: either accept the risk of random catastrophic boiler explosions, crippling transport and terrifying crews, or divert scarce troops and manpower to guard coal dumps, tenders, and fuel supplies, thus reducing forces available for frontline duties. Both outcomes served Allied strategic aims. This psychological effect, forcing the enemy to resource drain, watch, and fear, was as much a weapon as the explosives themselves. The Germans recognized the concept's potency and experimented with similar methods. When Abwehr saboteurs landed in the United States in June 1942 as part of Operation Pastorius, their equipment included plastic explosives molded to resemble coal, as well as fuses. All the agents were captured before operations began, but the episode shows the idea's broad appeal. The British double agent Eddie Chapman, Agent Zigzag, provided direct confirmation that the Germans had attempted to prepare coal bombs. In March 1943, the Abwehr gave Chapman 2 such devices intended for sabotage. Chapman surrendered them to the ship's captain aboard the City of Lancaster, who in turn forwarded them to counter-sabotage authorities for analysis. That analysis showed German coal bomb engineering lagging British innovation. The Germans were still using drilled real coal, while SOE had advanced to molded designs.
The Americans recognized the weapon's potential as well. OSS Research and Development, under Stanley Lovell, developed its own variant, codenamed Black Joe, using a different explosive composition, Pentolite 6040, and creating a camouflage kit so agents could match devices to local coal types. Like the British, OSS appreciated that the simpler the planting procedure, the broader the number of people who could carry out sabotage. A coal lump that required only being tossed onto a pile democratized destructive capability. Quantifying explosive coal's direct effect is therefore messy. SOE's output was measurable, distribution channels are documented, the wider campaign's results, locomotive attacks, traffic reductions, railway paralysis around D-Day, are indisputable. Whether a given boiler disaster was caused by a drilled coal charge, a molded explosive lump, a timed device, incendiary coal, or pure mechanical failure often cannot be established now. But the strategic outcomes are telling. French railway traffic plummeted in the vital months before and after D-Day. German reinforcements were delayed. Resources were diverted to defend rail and fuel installations. Explosive coal was one discrete tool among many, and its chief achievement may be that it made German commanders paranoid about every coal pile they encountered. The legacy of those wartime innovations is visible in later clandestine tradecraft. Station 15's camouflage workshops and the thatched barns prop makers pioneered a stubbornly creative approach to deception that carried into Cold War covert engineering. Disguised charges, dead rats stuffed with explosives to be pushed into factory furnaces, explosive logs, mines hidden in animal dung, all descend from the same conceptual lineage, conceal the weapon inside the everyday object the enemy trusts. US and NATO clandestine doctrine in later decades would continue to explore disguised and improvised devices in both sabotage and denial operations. A number of surviving test samples and contemporary footage document the program. The Imperial War Museum holds examples and some filmed 16mm tests shot by Cecil Clarke at Station 17. The International Spy Museum in Washington and the Museum of World War II in Massachusetts also catalog specimens and explanatory material. These artifacts are small but telling reminders of an approach to irregular warfare that married craftsmanship, chemistry, and cunning. So the story closes where it began, 1942, a secret English workshop where engineers turned lumps of common fuel into instruments of terror for an occupying power. SOE produced roughly 3.5 tons of explosive coal, molded and drilled into realistic forms, and sent thousands of devices into occupied Europe. We cannot always point to a named locomotive, date, and place and say this was caused by explosive coal because the device was designed precisely to erase its own trail. That historical invisibility is also a proof. When a weapon is both effective and deniable, you will rarely find tidy attribution in surviving records. Explosive coal exemplifies unconventional warfare at its most elegant and unsettling, measured not in a neat tally of confirmed kills, but in the fear sowed among enemy officers, the troops redirected to guard coal, the months of factory work needed to replace motive power, and the cumulative strain on a logistics system already under pressure. British engineers identified a vulnerability and used a quarter-pound of plastic explosive hidden inside a fake rock to turn Germany's dependency on coal into a weapon of the covert war. That was SOE ingenuity, small, ugly, invisible, and devastating, and one more way the Allies attacked the Third Reich from the inside.